All right, you guys, we are almost live. I'll tell you when it pops up. Good to go.
All right.
All right. Hi again. I'm Mike, chair of the Disability Caucus at the Albany County Democratic Committee. And I'd like to welcome everybody back to our town halls. We have a double feature today, and we have our district attorney, David Soares, joining with us now. For anyone who doesn't know yet, what is the Disability Caucus? We are people with disabilities. Disability represents in its broadest term 1/6 of the world population, and we felt that should also be reflected in just about everything we do as a society, including in our politics, our political parties, our local and state and national committees, also our elected officials. Some of us should also be disabled instead of us, dropping everything at budget time every year and running down to the state capitol to ask somebody else do what we need to do for us. Why can't we do it ourselves? So we should get more people running for public office, getting involved in politics. Also, whenever a party committee comes out with a policy platform, we should be guiding them to make sure that they don't leave out anything that we need done for the disability segment of our population. And that's quite a few things. There should be a disability angle to just about every institution and every idea for public policy. And so our role is to advise and putting that together. So now I'll turn it over to Zach Garofalo, who will go over a few things for how we're going to do this. Zach?
Thanks, Mike. So first, I want to thank you, Mr. Soares, Chairman Flynn, Mike, your leadership, and everyone in the caucus, your commitment to the full inclusion of people with disabilities in civic life. And because of your leadership, the caucus is working to get eligible people with disabilities registered to vote, educated about this year's election, and ready to cast their ballot. I want to share an interesting statistic that I recently came across. So Rutgers University did a survey in early 2020 about voting patterns of people with disabilities. And in 2020, there were over 35 million eligible voters with disabilities across the United States. And that figure jumps to over 62 million eligible voters when you also include people living in that same household. And then that figure continues to multiply when you consider the ripple effect of the disability community, aides, attendants, service providers, special education teachers. But unfortunately, only 16 million people with disabilities voted in the 2016 presidential election, and that turnout was 6% lower than the population of people without disabilities. So by organizing and mobilizing, what we're trying to do is to ensure that candidates address issues that are important to our community. I think it would be a little negligent and turning to another subject, obviously, it'd be a little negligent if we didn't address the devastating toll that COVID-19 has had on people with disabilities, older adults, and those with compromised immune systems. In early June, over 1,700,000 positive cases of COVID-19 and nearly 115,000 deaths. That number continues to grow exponentially. And that has had a devastating impact on our community. So preserving the health of the disability and senior community remains a top priority for us. So we invite you, Mr. Soares, people watching, and anybody else who wants to partner with us to explore innovative ways to engage our community. We're open to feedback, and we look forward to collaboration and hope to bring additional virtual events like this and other innovative educational opportunities. And also, during these changing times, empowering people with disabilities to vote is more important than ever to ensure that the disability community's voice is represented. So again, thank you all for your commitment to this, and I'll throw this back to you, Mike.
All right, thank you, Zach. And so now we will get into the meat of the program. It'll be very simple. Katie here will be our moderator. We have a bunch of prepared questions to go through. And if anybody listening here on Zoom, if you have any questions that you want to add, just put it on the chat at the bottom of the screen. And for anybody watching and listening on Facebook, you can add your questions in the comment area. And so now I'm going to mute myself and then turn it over to Katie.
Hey everyone, my name is Katie Carroll. I'll be asking the questions today with the help of others who might want to jump in. So thank you so much, District Attorney. I am a City of Albany resident. I live in Pine Hills. I happen to be a lawyer, but you wouldn't know me. I have not stepped foot in the area of criminal justice. I'm a caucus member, and I really appreciate you taking the time to discuss disability rights issues with us today. So before I start throwing questions at you, do you want to take just a minute and introduce yourself?
Sure. So David Soares, I've had the honor and pleasure of serving the people of this county for over 20 years. The first 5 as an assistant district attorney under the leadership of Saul Greenberg. And the last 16 years as the district attorney serving here in Albany County. One of the things that I can say throughout my time is looking for opportunities to always innovate and to make the practice of law as well as the services that we deliver in the justice system to victims of crime, as well as citizens and quite honestly, just our community. Always looking to innovate and adopt the best practices so that the system can be easier. As many of you know, it can be quite the intimidating experience if you've ever had to come into a courthouse, either as a witness or a victim or a grand juror or a person serving. We look to certainly take a lot of that discomfort away in our practice, and I'm looking forward to talking about that in more detail as we move on this evening. So thank you.
I really appreciate that introduction. Thank you. It can certainly be a rattling experience to have to seek services from the court system. So thank you for acknowledging that. And actually, that's a great segue into the first question that I would like to ask you. And you probably noted that our question set isn't necessarily geared towards your particular office, the office that you're holding, or the one that you're running for. Again, so I'll modify them to the best of my ability to suit your office. So I would like to start by asking, how have you ensured, or what do you think you need to do in the future to ensure that the district attorney's office is able to appropriately interact with disabled citizens, including people who may be nonverbal, use a communication device, or who are deaf? And I'd like to think broadly about all the people that your office interacts with, including potential jurors, people accused of crimes, and witnesses. So all of the above.
Yeah. So certainly coming into the office of the Albany County District Attorney back in 2004, I had a lot more hair, certainly was less robust than I appear right now on the screen. But I came into the office with a deep sense of turning an organization from that of a reactionary organization to one that was more proactive. Right? I knew from one of my experiences, just as a prosecutor, I had prosecuted a case in Albany City Court involving members of our senior community. As my mom would say, because she's 92, she'd say, they're not seniors, they're grown-ups. So I'll use the term here. So we had a number of grown-ups that were witnesses to my case. I'll never forget that experience because we had to work around their medication schedule. We had to work around other appointments that they had, and this was a 3-day trial. And I just remember our grown-ups coming into the courtroom, which, as you're probably not the most comfortable furniture in the courtroom, but having to sit in such discomfort all throughout that process. That experience stayed with me my entire career until I eventually became the district attorney. And it was rooted in that experience that we created this program called Seniors in Law Enforcement Together. And that program has evolved to address other people who may have very specific needs. And what that is it's just the simple idea of deploying the resources of your office to engage in a service to other people in their own setting. And I'll give you this example. It costs money to get a cab to come down to 6 Lodge Street to meet with an ADA if you're a person who's been a victim of crime. What we do in the SALT program is we put together an investigator. We put together that investigator with a victim's advocate, as well as an ADA. And we will meet anyone wherever they are. In the instances that I'm speaking of specifically, is instead of having the police knock on a door, with the radio and all of those loud devices at the door, which can be intimidating, we'll meet with our victims in any place that makes them comfortable. And we do that interview, but we do that interview once with all of the people around the table, as opposed to having multiple calls, as opposed to having multiple engagements, which can get in the way of other more serious appointments in the lives of that person.
Thank you so much for that. I'm wondering, do you have any specific thoughts about working with people who may need an additional accommodation or access to needs communication access in some way? Are there systems in place to bring in sign language interpreters, produce materials in accessible formats, things like that?
We do, and we cover the entire gambit of those issues. We were the first office to actually have victim advocates cohabitating the same space with us, and our victim advocates are very specifically trained on meeting the needs of a whole host of people. We've actually done interviews with technology, using technology. So the reality is, and I'm sure all of you on this call know, anyone can be a victim, whether it's a victimization of physical abuse or scam, because predators will find you where you are. And sometimes what they're doing is finding people on the computers or on the internet. And so we have the capability within the organization, with all of the experts that we have, to provide those kind of have those interview skills. We have the accommodations, large spaces in our office in order to accommodate people. But again, I think for us, our greatest value is being able to go to people with that talent, as opposed to having people come to downtown in the middle of the day with all of that traffic to come into a very intimidating space.
So I'm going to actually ask the same question, but with a different flavor, because I do want to acknowledge some of like the risk that disabled people are at of being victims and survivors of crime. The statistics tell us that people with disabilities are much more likely than disabled people to be the victim of a violent crime. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities experience sexual assault at much higher rates than the general population. And in some cases, they're specifically targeted because of their type of disability. So I guess I'm asking the same question, but wondering how you in your office would address the sexual assault of people with intellectual disabilities and right, and supporting them. And I'll add some background as well. So there are complicating factors in that sometimes disabled people, we rely on people to receive services, family members, significant others, partners, and things can get complicated very quickly when the very people that we rely on for services commit crimes against us, and it creates significant conflict and sometimes barriers to seeking assistance. So I was wondering if you wanted to address that specifically.
Well, one of the things that I am supremely proud of is I happen to have a group of people that I work with under the leadership of Bureau Chief Shannon Sarfo of the Special Victims Unit. This is a person with over 20 years of experience and is involved with just about every multiple disciplinary team in the Capital District. What you've articulated is incredibly tragic, but we all know that it absolutely happens, and it is happening to people that people with disabilities rely on the most. And I will tell you this about Albany County, and I don't know whether you know this or not, and forgive me if I'm telling you something that you already know, is that we have an amazing group of trained professional people in a variety of different institutions that really help us get the job done. I can say with confidence that cases that we've had involving rape, especially rape in a variety of our centers in our community, they've been handled with absolute professionalism, not only from the very first responder, which is oftentimes the police, the detectives, right down the continuum to Albany Med and St. Peter's with the sexual assault nurse examiners that handle these cases with absolute true professionalism and care, right down to our labs that provide us with the requisite forensic evidence to be able to hold these offenders accountable. I think it's been the combination of laws that have been authored over the course of the last 15, 20 years that create a per se violation, felony, misdemeanors in cases when we're talking about victims who cannot consent. So it's the combination of those laws. It's been the great professionalism and expertise of first responders. It's been the partnerships with medical examiners and the hospitals that have contributed to our success whenever we've had those cases in the Albany County District Attorney's Office.
Thank you so much, District Attorney. Before asking questions about disabled people who have encounters with law enforcement, I'd like to ask you one question which we didn't send you, which kind of came up in one of our town halls with one of our assembly members running for reelection. I'm wondering, so there's a system in place to, I guess, address allegations of crimes committed against people who are residing in, who are in residences that are certified by the state of New York. And this typically applies to people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. So we have the Justice Center, and unfortunately, it's come to light there have been issues in the way that the Justice Center has been handling certain cases, and it's been the recipient of significant criticism. And I was wondering, from your perspective, what changes do you think need to be made in the system, if any?
Well, sure. I think, well, interestingly enough about the Justice Department is we were around. As a matter of fact, it was our case in Albany County that led to the actual creation of that agency. And for the most part, that agency is stock full of attorneys that have a very specialized training and understanding of people with disabilities and the crimes that are perpetrated against them. I think some of the issues that have happened over the years have been ones that are more legal in nature than the quality of service that's been provided, and that's because the drafting of the legislation that created the Justice Center was very confusing. So the issue there was whether or not they independently, without the authorization of local prosecutors, can pursue these cases. Originally, we interpret that statute to stand on its own and for those folks having sole jurisdiction over these cases. The courts in Albany County, a court in Albany County disagreed with that. And as a result, we've had to change a lot of the language in our cooperating agreements with them. By and large, I think they do an effective job. I think they're handling more cases than would ever have come to the attention of law enforcement. And those cases that are specifically egregious, as you mentioned, they do communicate with us, and we exchange ideas, and they are holding people accountable. But I don't have information as to any specific case that they may have dropped the ball on, and I don't recall there being one. I do understand that there are legal issues, constitutional issues that are challenging that agency right now as we speak.
Thank you so much for taking that question. So with that, I think I'd like to turn to a couple of questions about encounters with the justice system. So the first one being, what steps would you take to address the school to prison pipeline for students with disabilities? How do you see yourself addressing that?
Well, first and foremost, I think specifically as it relates to schools, what we definitely need more of is training and kids being diagnosed as early in the process as possible, because in the training that we've received in the office, we certainly know that there are individuals who have conditions that may that make those individuals appear to sometimes be drunk, but they're not. We do know that there are a variety of different mental health issues that can, when expressed, can appear to be behavioral in nature. And so we have to make sure that these kids who are demonstrating a mental health issue are not being mistaken to be individuals who are causing problems and therefore dismissed which then causes them to be on that path towards prison, as you say. Now, what I can say about our specific work with the schools, we are in a space right now that I think that we absolutely need to be, and that is the alternative schools that exist here in the city of Albany, specifically the Tony Clement Center for Education. My personal favorite place in the world to be, because we know that so many of the young people that are in that school are kids that are very intelligent. They're super intelligent, but what they need is some redirection. We put a lot of resources into that school to make sure that we're removing these young people from this environment as well. One of my favorite programs that we have in the office is called the NIPM program. It stands for National Youth Program Using Motorbikes. So we partnered with the Honda Corp, and Honda donated about 30 motorcycles to us, motocross bikes, that are stored at Camp Pinnacle in Bern. And these young kids who may show up to TCC with either behavioral issues, not coming to school, they actually work to earn riding time on those bikes. And so you go a whole week and you're earning points, and those points are converted into hours. And we pick you up and we take you to Bern, and you get to ride all day on Friday while also receiving your coursework. It's a program that's helped out a lot of young people, but it's also one that I realized we have to be able to duplicate in a variety of different spaces so everyone has access to those opportunities. But I think that meeting the challenge where the challenge exists, as opposed to sitting back and waiting for failure, is what we have to do. And not just the DA's office or law enforcement, but I think all of us have a responsibility to do that.
Thank you so much for sharing about that particular program. The next question I have, I suspect I know the answer to, but we'll see. Very simply, do you support law enforcement assisted diversion, or LEAD? Absolutely.
Albany is okay. So the office that I walked into in 1999, and I was an intern in this office. So going back to 98, so I've been my whole professional life as a student, as well as I've been in this office. And the police department in the city of Albany back in 2000 is nothing like it is today. I remember the first time I brought restorative justice to Albany County and implemented restorative justice practices in Albany City Court in the form of community accountability boards. And that was met with such disdain because it's just not what we're accustomed to doing. We just want to do the same things. So I absolutely understand the challenges of thinking differently and bringing new alternatives to a very traditional space. But what I've learned with the Albany Police and everything that they've gone through over the years is that they've adapted extremely well, and they've outpaced a lot of other agencies. And so LEAD, the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, I happen to be co-chair to that program. And the idea that we can create diversions at the very beginning of an interaction, and the idea that we have diversions once an individual is in the system, and we also create opportunities for people to still have diversions well into the investigation or prosecution of a case, speaks volumes about Albany. But where we need to move forward too. So as I just said, we have diversion at the front, diversion in the middle. Where we need to move to is creating the opportunity for people who may have made mistakes, and those mistakes were made in their youth or mistakes made way in their past. We need to be able to create a process for them to be able to seal those convictions, expunge those records so that they're not laboring under the weight of a mistake, and allowing for that mistake to define who they are moving forward for the rest of their lives. And that's what we're working on now with our redemption program.
I think the members of this caucus can certainly appreciate when it comes to trying to just get on with your life, and to use employment as an example, the barriers that arise simply because of the assumptions that are made about you as a person. I think there are similarities between having a disability and having a criminal record in that regard. Another question that we have is, would you support, and I apologize, I don't know what this acronym stands for, but a CIT program in which people in a mental health or substance use crisis are brought to a behavioral health center for assessment, help, and services. And this is related to diversion in a sense.
Absolutely. So what is important to understand and to understand from where I'm sitting is, we all talk about diversion. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, we passed a Raise the Age program where kids that are 16 and 17 go to family court as opposed to come to adult court for a whole host of offenses. And the idea there was, well, they're going to get more services there, and they're going to, walk away from the experience and not have a criminal record that they would have to labor under. And which that was fine. Except what didn't happen was funding to follow, the innovation. And innovation without funding and support is really not innovation, okay? So I think one of the things that courts are seeking, that people in my position are seeking, is greater infrastructure within our respective communities, where if you're going to divert a case, you're diverting them into a very specific infrastructure that you can have confidence will be effective, right? So I think when it comes to like mental health, we need to go back to creating greater spaces for mental health outside of the criminal justice system. I think we can use the criminal justice system to divert out people who are obviously coming in with mental health issues. But we also need to have a reliable infrastructure that exists outside of the criminal justice system to make sure that we can attend to the needs of individuals with mental health issues. The other thing that I would point out is that for 20 years, the thing I continue to hear is how difficult it is to provide treatment services for people who are dual diagnosed with drug addiction as well as mental health. And there are very few service providers in our community that can meet that challenge. So I think one of the things that needs to come out of this greater discussion around the country and in our own community about criminal justice reform, it's not just about, changing numbers at the end of a sentence or changing processes like bail or discovery. We have to start thinking about building capacity outside of the criminal justice system to attend to the needs of people. And who knows, if their needs are attended to, maybe they're not even coming into our system.
So if it's all right, I'd like to respond to that with a question that we did not send you ahead of time. So yeah, in continuing to think about adequately funding services so that people can actually access them, do you think that the argument to defund the police is a legitimate one in favor of redirecting government funding to social services? I was wondering how you felt about that.
Yeah, I'm not in agreement with defunding the police, and here's my reason why. First of all, I think what needs to come out of the frustration and anger that we're seeing right now throughout the country is sound, sensible policy. I will say this. I refer to some of the legislation that we've seen recently as palm card legislation, because it's palm card legislation in the sense that you passed it, you didn't fund it, and I think you passed it so that you can put it on a political palm card and run again, right? Um, so when you're talking about services to the community, I can tell you right now that calls for service in our poorest communities is also the highest. In other words, if you're talking about Pine Hills and you're talking about West Hill, Arbor Hill, in the south end of Albany, that's where you get the highest calls for service. So someone there needs the police there to address an issue, right? I will point out that we've had a shooting just about every single day in the city of Albany, in the communities that some of the communities that I just laid out for you. Now, I can assure you of one thing. When there's the sound of a bullet, sound of a gun, and a bullet is flying through the air, we're not calling anyone other than the police to come address those issues. And so by defunding them, I don't know what people who are in the most fragile communities, what people who are in the most violent communities are supposed to do. And I see that as taking away perhaps the only on-demand resource that they can get. Now, I also think it's a false choice. This idea that in order to seek to get investment into our poor communities, we have to take away from another resource. I think that's a false choice. And I also think that we're not being creative enough in how we create revenue streams to invest in those neighborhoods. By the way, if what you're telling me is a new model that we're all going to be functioning under, where we give it our collective best to improve the lives of people, to reduce crime in a specific community, and see that reduction remain, stable over a course of time, I say yes. Now we can take a look at that and say, well, there's some resources in our budget here that can be repurposed towards something else. But the idea that we have inadequate funding for prevention of crime, and we have inadequate funding for our youth, and we're going to take away, law enforcement resources from the community, that to me is a recipe for absolute disaster.
Thank you so much for taking that question and for your response. As you mentioned, there has been some legislation passed and signed recently at the state level. And we do have one question on one of those pieces of legislation in particular. And so I'd like to know, and that's the STAT Act. And the STAT Act seeks to collect demographic data on people who die so-called arrest-related deaths. The data collected includes age, race, and sex, but not disability. And I do realize that the legislation does not directly implicate the district attorney's office. This is requested of police departments, but I'd like to know, do you consider this legislation to be palm card legislation, as you refer to it? And if not, would you support expanding the law to require that demographic data be collected, including disability, in addition to those other demographics?
Let's start with the last question first, and the answer to that would be absolutely yes. All right. If we're talking about being counted, you've got to count everyone. And here's what I mean by palm card. And so the first question that you would ask me is whether or not I consider this, legislation to be. So here's the deal. If it's just a piece of legislation that's passed without the resources necessary to have that data collected and monitored and reviewed, then what did we achieve, right? To answer your question, that's a great start. And I think data should be collected always, right? Let's think about that for a moment. You have Amazon, right? You have these conglomerates that use all of this data to make decisions about where they're going to invest, what new things they're going to create, and information on who's going to consume them. But yet, we don't have, you know, the kind of data capture mechanisms in place to do the same thing for human beings in most important, in my opinion, one of the most important functions in society. So I think that the legislation is catching up with what I consider to be very common sense and things that we should be doing. Now, in terms of what's contained in the legislation, a lot of departments are already doing that. They're capturing that information, and they're required to maintain that information. But it's not uniform. So what this legislation does is it brings uniformity to the large jurisdictions and small jurisdictions, compelling everyone to comply. So from that point, that's a good thing. The question is, you know, we have more to do, and how far and how much more are we going to be seeing in terms of thoughtful and conscientious legislation actually gets the job
done.
Thank you so much, District. Right. Thank you, Zach. I think you're
Okay.
going to say the same thing that I will.
I just had a thought. I mean, there was something that was said a little bit earlier. It's not in
District Attorney, could I just ask you to hold up 1 second? I think we're experiencing some technical difficulties.
April 9th of last year, the governor passed his budget, and within that budget were criminal justice reforms that every office, every police department had to comply with because of this effective date of January 1st, 2020. Well, what we had to do in order to be in compliance is we had to digitize every single document, every file in the office. I have an amazing group of people that made copies and digitized every sheet of paper. What that did was it enabled us to completely go green, no longer need what's that? I'm sorry.
This is Katie, District Attorney. Can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Hi, District Attorney, are you able to hear us?
Yes.
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay.
I can hear you, yes.
So we lost a big chunk of that. There was, some interference with the connection.
Okay.
This is Katie. Can I be heard?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Katie.
Okay. Right. So my hope is that we'll be able to get down your it was unfortunately like drawn out, like the connection caused your response to come in very slowly. So my hope is that maybe we can salvage it with the captioning app. It sounds like we're doing a little bit better. So I think I will ask one more quick question, see if there are any questions out there from others, and then we can wrap up with respect to your time because we're coming up on 9 o'clock. I'll just end by changing gears a little bit and just ask about employment. People with disabilities are overwhelmingly unemployed and underemployed, and so we experience significant poverty compared to the non-disabled population. And so I just wanted to know what you as district attorney would do to increase the hiring of ADAs with disabilities and well, in other positions in the district attorney's office.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Because I'm having trouble with my video. It says that someone shut me off, which is okay. So
I don't think we don't want to see you, but it might help unburden the connection.
Sure, that's okay. I've been told that before. Yeah. So what I was saying before was that, my office having to be have to be digital and digitized. We have no more files that are paper files. Everything now is coming to us from every department via a connection, via a fiber connection. Now, we did all of this in anticipation of January 1st and having to comply with new discovery laws and new bail laws. And we started, and we were fantastic. We were doing very well. And then COVID hit. So we were preparing for the reforms, but what we really did in preparation for the reforms would have put us in the best footing, thanks to the Albany County legislature. It put us in the best footing to deal with COVID, because every single person that I have working in my office has been working from home. Now, what does that mean? That means that we have to just really rethink the way that we're all doing our jobs. I think that because of Zoom and because of offices being able to continue their functions from remote locations, it really creates a wonderful opportunities for people with disabilities to get jobs in offices like mine, where, depending on the function, where that could not have been possible before. So I think that is certainly something that is a robust opportunity that we need to explore. I will also say this. In my office, before we hire anyone, we always reach out to the affirmative action office, and we ask for applicants. As you know, in my office, we have a portion of the organization that is at will. We also have a portion of the operation that we have to work off of the civil service list. I would love to have an organization like the affirmative action group in our county, where we can, in fact, be offering more opportunities with people with different abilities. And that's something that I think moving forward, we should really explore. Because discovery coming in from a police department, whether it's videotapes, whether it's dash cams, whether it's arrest reports, that's something that anyone who could look, and understand and use the technology would be able to assist us in our efforts to fight crime and build hope. So yes, COVID was definitely, and continues to definitely be a game changer in many ways, but it's also creating opportunities in ways we could not have imagined.
Thank you so much. I want to check in with Zach to see if there are any questions floating out there on Facebook that we should address quickly before we close.
No, Katie, we don't have any questions from Facebook.
Thank you. So District Attorney, as much as I'd love to continue this conversation with you, we did only block out an hour. So if you'd like to give us any closing remarks, we'd love to hear them, and then I'll pass it back to Mike.
Sure. Thank you so much for this opportunity to really engage this evening. I hope that I'm invited back and that we continue to dialogue on this, because this is a very important issue. 1 out of 4 people that I've hired in my office is a person of color. And I do that because I believe that if you want diversity in your organization, you really have to work for it, and you have to go and find talented people in order to create an environment like that in my organization. I have 8 positions within my organization that are leadership positions, and 7 of them are filled by women. I offer that to you because I believe that in order for an organization to be effective and to deliver its services and to engage in the kind of work that we engage in, and to have the kind of success that we've experienced for the last 16 years, that organization must reflect the community it serves. And so this wasn't an empty gesture when I say that moving forward, we need to engage one another so that we can take someone who may be on the unemployed rolls and provide that individual with an opportunity to fight crime and build hope like the rest of the team at the Albany County District Attorney's Office. So I'm hoping that this is the first conversation, and it's not the last conversation, and we continue it. So thank you very much for this evening.
We greatly appreciate that. Thank you. And Mike, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Thank you so much, David Soares, and so much for Tech Valley, huh? And with that, we come to the end of this town hall. We have one more scheduled for tomorrow, 5 o'clock, with another primary challenger, Matthew Toporowski. So we hope to see everybody back for that one. And until then, be safe. Good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.